Hey everybody, my name is Yyanthire, and the storyline has been planned for pretty much years now, but it has never really came to fruition in any kind of way. So now with the 3D overhaul to the game, I can actually start to create cutscenes and all that other kinds of stuff and lore and whatnot, and really start to integrate that into the game and really spruce up the intro. So instead of just spawning into the world with just a single unit and then running around, you're actually given some context into the world and what's going on and all that kind of stuff. So, without further ado, the first major element I need to do is I actually need to set up the initial parts of the world. So the way the world's going to work in the beginning is we're going to get a glimpse into the origination of what's going on here. So this is going to take place approximately 1,000 years prior to the events going on right now. And you're going to be following the main character of the game, Grandmaster Nolzevra. This character basically has created what is known as a fragment, and this fragment has essentially corrupted the world, and a lot of the world itself has become basically evil. Basically, the shortest synopsis I can give of it. It's going to be significantly more clearly explained in the intro cutscenes and then the intro part of the game. But as for the intro part of the game, the first playable area is actually going to be inside the lair of the fragment itself. So you'll basically be inside the fragment and doing some initial events in there before transitioning 1,000 years into the future and coming into here, the Grove. So without further ado, the first thing I need to do is actually set up the map for the lair. Alright, so I figured now would be a good time to start to talk about the art direction for the first map of the game. This is going to be inside of the fragment itself, the lair, so without trying to give out too much detail, I still want it to be a fresh experience for anybody new to the game. I'm starting to kind of level design and sort of artistically design just the basics of the map, so ground floor, and then of course all of this fog and stuff, and I think it came out pretty nice, pretty creepy, blurry, a deep reddish purple feeling to it, so definitely a starting direction at least. And then of course I'll be wanting to probably liven up the atmosphere with probably some like jet black trees or something like that, or a bunch of dead trees or something that look kind of cool, and of course like tons of particle effects and whatnot. But this is the initial basically just the initial artistic pass, and I have the level design blocked out as well, so I'll be able to kind of play around with that. But this is the first attempt at this. Let's go ahead and play around with it some more and kind of update you guys as I go along. Alright, so here's a little small update going on. So I went ahead and adjusted all of the colors and whatnot, and added all these little spikes and stuff going around that are like covered in like black. And of course, the ground itself kind of covered around in black. So I really wanted to give it a like a blurry, creepy kind of atmosphere going on right now. So I think that's pretty good. I like the floor is really a mixture of like this purple and this red, and I think it looks pretty good and really fits the theme I'm trying to go around with. Which is kind of wandering around. You can see the level design is going to be kind of open to an extent. This is going to be the intro, so you're going to have a pretty powerful unit that's going to be able to just kind of destroy their way through all of these enemies, and then come up through here, do something, and then you got to escape. And then afterwards, you'll basically be finding yourself in the Grove. So the next main part of the map is I need to get a lot of grass in here. I want to have some like dark, deep red and purple and black grass just kind of everywhere, all over the place. Then after that, of course, I want some like jet black trees just kind of sitting up around here. I don't know if I want to do trees or if I want to do dead trees, so I'll kind of probably I'll mix it up a little bit and see what I like the best. But this is the current direction going on for the first map. Alright, so I went ahead and finished off the lair map, as you can see here. Plenty of trees, plenty of grass, plenty of pretty much just fog and ambience, and just sort of like a fairly kind of creepy kind of atmosphere, and I think I kind of achieved that with all the spiky ground, and of course anything else. I think it looks pretty neat. I might want to, maybe I'll consider making it a little bit darker, but right now I think the color scheme's pretty nice. A lot of vivid colors with a lot of dark colors. Exploring is pretty good as well. See, all these spikes just look really cool. Everything just feels so ambient. I'll certainly be messing around with a lot of stuff such as the main character and whatnot as you'll be playing through this little area. But I think the entire design right now is pretty good so far. So going from here, it's actually, I need to jump over and do some storyboarding. So the introduction, I'm anticipating right now having sort of like an intro cutscene. I think that would be fairly interesting. So there is still a lot more to do on this little map. I definitely have to set up all of the, basically the enemies, the exploration that you need to do. There's going to be one boss fight, and then there's going to be an escape sequence, and then that's going to follow into basically a secondary map with an in-game cutscene. And then from there, you'll basically be almost... you'll go to the Grove after that, do a little cutscene for that, and then you'll be basically at the main tutorial map that you've already been playing in the demo. So that's the current design idea. Whoa, alright, so what changed? So, this is actually a big difference and also a bit of time since the last clip. So, since the last clip, I've actually gone ahead and released the demo 2.0 version of the game. Figured that would probably be the best time to do it. I wanted to kind of do it with the storyline and all in there, but it didn't really work out too well. So, now kind of going forward in this clip, I'm actually wanting to start to go ahead and initiate more simplicity and more levels to the difficulty. So let's kind of just go from the top area. So I had this idea for an adjustment to the game where instead of for controlling an RTS style of basically just controlling an RTS, you only have to control this single unit in much more of a simplistic manner. So I kind of went ahead and started to think about that a little bit, and I realized that I don't want to do a direct genre change by any means. I really want to keep the RTS style to the game still here, but I do like the idea of having a simplistic mode. So what this simplistic mode would do would basically mean that you'd have your character right here, you'd only need to be controlling one single character, and as you moved around, the camera would of course just follow that character. Make everything very simple and very easy to basically just to understand and basically get into and start playing the game. So there's a bunch of reasons why I want to do this change and why I want to actually add it to the game. This isn't going to be an overhaul, of course, as I mentioned. The RTS game mode is still going to be in there, but this is basically the base level. So at least over here in the Western world, the RTS game genre is pretty much, it's there, but it's not as prevalent as a lot of other genres, and a lot of other genres have really started to take over. I'm not really too concerned about the popularity of the genre, but what I am concerned about is the playability of the RTS genre. So as I've been playing the game, I've been noticing that I can only... The easiest and most direct way to play the game is just have my multiple units and just sort of run around the map. And I pretty much had them all grouped up for the most part while playing the game. In most normal RTS games, you'll probably have your units spread all around. You'll be, performing your attack, all that kind of stuff. And the multitasking aspect is pretty fun, but it's also a huge learning curve, especially for new players. So a simplistic way to start and initiate yourself into the game would actually be a huge benefit to this, since this game does technically have a massive learning curve. I mean, pretty much by the end of this first map that you're in, you have your 3 units, and now you gotta start to control them, and that starts to get pretty complicated. And especially if I start to add even more units, that's gonna get way more complicated. So the first reason why I have for making a simplified adjustment to the game is for that purpose. I also noticed that a single unit control just makes the game a little bit more casual and a little bit more fun to play, in the sense of you don't have the overhang of where your camera currently is, which is a pretty huge thing where I'll be most likely moving around, adjusting my camera, doing more movements, casting spells, looking around for all the other units, zooming in and out, and essentially doing all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of tricks and movement techniques that you kind of need to do in order to start to get into the game, which for me, since I've literally created the game, that's not much of a problem. But for any new player, especially someone that hasn't had any RTS experience or has had very little RTS experience, you're probably not gonna do too well, and you're just gonna end up getting frustrated, I would imagine, at least. Another important aspect to this is the fact that you'll be able to switch between the simplified playstyle and the RTS playstyle pretty much at will. You'll need to be in the home base map, which is the map after this one. So it's not like you're locking yourself out of being able to play as this. Or at least that's my intention. I have yet to code it, but that's the intention I want to go with. Another reason is the replayability factor. I imagine most players, especially those
if you're new to the game, and even if you do have a lot of RTS experience, it might be recommended just to start off with the simplistic playstyle, and then after you beat that, if you want to do a second playthrough of the game, play it in RTS mode, and you get basically just a whole new, almost like a whole new game in a sense, in terms of controls and usability, because this is going to bleed into the future parts of the game, which I'll discuss here in a little bit. So the future direction of the game, you've of course seen it with the advancement to the Apprentice. As you can see here, we have our Disciple in front of us, and as soon as you beat the map that we're in and defeat Baron, you go ahead and unlock the ability to advance into an Apprentice. So this class feature is pretty much brought on from the original 2D version of the game, and it's going to continue. So beyond Apprentice, you're actually going to be able to associate your character with a specific element, so air, fire, water, etc. And with these are basically your classes. So with these simplistic styles of the game, you're basically almost playing this as though it's an action RPG, and you select a class, although you're, in this particular instance for the game, you're pretty much selecting a class like a few hours into the game, rather than immediately at the start, which I think is kind of more fair, in all honesty, because picking your class at the start, you have no idea what the game's even about. But picking your class, 3 hours in when you actually have an idea of what's going on, that's pretty cool. And then also, equally as importantly, you have a lot of freedom to switch classes, as you could in the 2D version of the game. You could pretty much just switch between any class at any point in time. And what this would mean for the RTS version of the game is actually pretty cool, because the simplified version, you're basically playing an action RPG, you're playing a single class, that's cool. But in the RTS version, you're now playing as all the classes, so you're basically building your army composition to account for any and all sorts of weaknesses that class may have. So for example, if you had 3 units, you can run 1 fire class, 1 air class, maybe 1 healing class, versus if you're just playing and playing in the simplified manner, you'd only be able to pick, the healing class, maybe only pick the air class for a given moment in time. Lastly, about the RPG elements, so this was also a feature in the 2D version of the game. It's going to get added and also heavily improved upon in this version of the game. This is going to be much later. This is going to be not until all the classes are essentially established, but the idea here is that with the RPG version of the game, you're going to be... So for these RPG elements, what I'm going to have is, at least this is the current concept, I'd like to be able to level up each individual class. I think that's pretty cool, especially when it comes to RTS element where you're like trying to level up all of your army composition. I think it could be a cool idea to also level up each individual spell element. So if I go ahead and hover over this Mystic Bolt, for example, as you can see, its element is Mystic. So any and all sorts of like Mystic elemental spells you'll get buffs for, or any kind of fire spells you'll get buffs for, etc. We could also possibly end up doing stuff per individual spell. That might get a little bit specific, but that could be kind of cool. And then of course the global elements, like the stats for all of your units. So regardless of what class you're in, you get a global unit buff to any of your stats like health, mana, damage, etc. And finally, what could be a possible good idea, just to kind of prime it for, is this simplistic manner could technically be a game mode where you could play it with WASD controls, so you'd be able to basically just move around in a normal, or in a more natural way, rather than using the right mouse button to click and then select a spot to move to. This would be pretty good if I were able to port this game onto like consoles, or even possibly mobile, if mobile can even handle this. But that would be a pretty cool thing to do in the future, is be able to offer this game mode, the simplified game mode, as basically a base game mode, and then if you're on PC, if you have a keyboard and mouse accessible, you would be able to play the RTS mode, which would be pretty cool, in all honesty. So with adding this simplified game mode, this would technically mean I'd probably have to relist all the branding and all that kind of information, just sort of mention that, oh hey, this is pretty much an action RPG / RTS, almost like a hybrid kind of style. So you can kind of pick whichever one you want to play as. And I'll need to talk about balancing here in a little bit, but the balancing should be pretty straightforward. Next, I'd like to actually talk about different types of game modes. So these would be the different difficulties. So by and large, I'm not too big of a fan of adding in difficulties to a game, like explicit difficulties, easy, medium, hard. But in this one I particularly was able to find a pretty interesting methodology of making the difficulties interesting. In normal games, when I used to play them, I would play them pretty much almost in normal exclusively. Recently I pretty much have been exclusively picking games and putting them into hard mode. Just right off the bat, just pick the hardest difficulty, because I typically find that to be more fun and more tuned to my playstyle in extents. But for a game like this, for Fragment's Moonrise, well, when it comes to games in general, I'm just a preference towards not having to pick any kind of difficulty, especially at the very beginning. You don't really know how hard the game even is, so you don't really know what difficulty to even pick. And I do like the concept of adaptive difficulty, so as you play through the game you get better unlocks and you can make the game as easy as you want or as difficult as you want. And so those ideas are still going to be pretty true for the difficulties in this game. However, I do want to kind of essentially levy the gap between the difficult introductory curve, so controls and understanding of spellcasting and understanding of elements and all the different understandings of the mechanics behind the game. So I feel like a few series of difficulties would really start to help out new players and start to get players more into the game. Definitely you're able to, so I would definitely like to be able to switch difficulties almost on the fly, similar to the simplistic versus RTS game modes, or RTS gameplay styles. I would anticipate being able to adjust difficulties in the home base. So let me kind of list off these difficulties just so you get an idea. So the easiest difficulty is going to be the Disciple difficulty. This is going to be this base game right now, but all of the enemies' health is cut in half and all their damage is cut in half as well. So I think this would be the best spot for any sort of brand new player to the game. They just pick simplistic and pick the Disciple difficulty, and they'll be able to start to kind of get an intro and get a feel for the game and just start to kind of understand it. Especially given the fact that I've seen a handful of reviews for the game just saying the game's pretty difficult. So giving them an inlet to be able to still enjoy the game and still understand it, and still understand that the fact that the game, yes, the game is still going to be difficult. The easy button, or the easy mode, is not just an outright easy win to the game, because that will be pretty boring. But it'll still allow them to play the game without having to worry about making too many mistakes, especially given the fact that the controls for RTS games, especially this one being more of an action RTS, is a little bit more on the difficult side. The next difficulty up was the Apprentice difficulty. So this is going to be the normal game mode, nothing's changed. This is going to be the recommended game mode for anybody that likes any sort of challenge aspect behind the game. So I could see users playing Apprentice difficulty with either simplistic or the RTS game modes. The next one up is actually going to be a new game mode, the Follower difficulty. This is going to be the hard difficulty, and I'm just going to allow enemies to basically have double health and double damage. This will just kind of tighten up and make the mistake level a little bit more apparent, and just kind of make it a little bit more fun. And I think that would be kind of a cool little additional challenge to the game. Albeit the most recommended way is still going to be the Apprentice difficulty, so the standard difficulty. Going one up, this is going to be where we start to get into more of the fun difficulties. So if you like a challenge, the Master difficulty is going to be the hardest difficulty, and it's just going to be outright enemies have double HP and every single enemy attack just one-shots your unit. So sounds a bit unfair. If it is unfair to you, don't play it, but this would be kind of like a you gotta be real on your toes and ready to basically dodge all the attacks. Really what this game mode is saying is that I'm fairly committed to making sure that all of the attacks can be dodged in the game, because that's very important to me, is the fact that you shouldn't be required to take any damage at any point in time in the game, and that every single time you get hit, it's your fault. To an extent, of course. It doesn't need to be too ridiculous, but that's what the Master difficulty is basically just out trying to say. And it could also be a fun little achievement if you beat the Master difficulty while simultaneously not getting any defeats. So defeats is when your unit dies. Just as, here, I can go ahead and show you. You have been defeated and returning home. Unit respawns, we're back at home, and here's our unit. So without getting any sort of defeats like that, that could be kind of cool. I was thinking of adding to the save file the number of deaths and number of defeats you've had. So number of deaths meaning unit deaths, and number of defeats meaning many times all of your units died. So the last one is probably going to be the most fun difficulty, quote unquote. This one is not really a difficulty, but it's the Grandmaster difficulty. So I call it a difficulty in pretty much name only. This is the custom difficulty mode. So I intend with this one to be able to basically do the basic levels of augmentation, so you can adjust enemy stats, adjust your own stats, that kind of thing. So if you want to do a challenge mode where the enemies all have 5 times HP and one-shot all your units, you can definitely do that if you want to. But the main purpose behind the Grandmaster difficulty is really being able to modify pretty much everything. So if you want to modify enemy spells, you can do that. Adjust spell sets from units, for example. Basically almost adding in mod tools to the game, which I know this difficulty mode would be pretty intricate to basically go ahead and design and implement into the game, but it would be definitely well worth it. Finally, I would love to be able to add a randomizer as part of this, so if you would like, or if you're interested in any kind of randomizer type games, especially this is much more popular with older games, this would be basically just a built-in modded version of a randomizer, so you can go ahead and switch around pretty much everything to your heart's content. I would anticipate, at least. That's the baseline goal. So with all that being said, I'll need to go ahead and begin integrating all of this. I would anticipate integrations for these Simplified and RTS game modes first, and just kind of get all those worked in, and then I'll work on the difficulties after. From there, of course, I have to work on the storyline, and then I also thought of a random map generator that I'd like to start to implement coming up here. So right now at this point in time, there are 3 maps. There's this map, there's the home base, and then there's the map right after that. And then of course there's going to be the storyline intro maps, but we're not going to include those as far as gameplay goes because they're just tutorials and story. But going forward after that, I'd like to start to implement some more random maps. So the purpose of these random maps is pretty important, in all honesty. The ability to be able to make lots of unique maps and start to make this into more of an open world game is very difficult for a single developer. It's not impossible, of course, but I'd like to basically focus my main efforts on the storyline related maps, so basically hard-coded maps like this, where everything's pretty much preset and you get to explore around like that, and have a lot of storyline and very important tailored gameplay experiences. The random maps serve as basically more content to be able to continue playing the game, and more stuff to fight, all that kinds of stuff, so more areas to explore is always good, and it's not going to be cutting into the storyline elements of the game in any way. So with all that being said, the first major adjustment that needs to be done is the fact that in Simplified mode versus RTS mode, you only have a single unit. So what can be done about that? And that's actually kind of a directly simple thing to understand. So the way I've gone ahead and designed the game has pretty much been around, you can have your 3 units and you're basically all just kind of grouped up together and you all just sort of run tight, close together as a pack and then fight your enemies that way. And that's been pretty much a pretty good design style I've gone for so far. So with that, since you're pretty much grouped up, when you take a hit, it's almost like your entire group takes a hit. Not in all scenarios, but to simplify things, when you take a hit, the group takes a hit. Simple. We're just gonna consider things as that, and as a result, you now have a third the damage that you're dealing. So as you can see here with this Mystic Bolt, it'll deal 10 damage. But when you have 3 units, you basically have a buff where every single unit that just casts is dealing 10 damage. That's basically your damage output is now 30. If everybody casts together, that's 30 damage. So what I went ahead and done is, as your supply increases, so will your damage output. So as you can see over here, if I come over here and I hover over this Essence of Nature, it has 15 health. I can go ahead and cast on it. We'll wait for it to cast, and there we go. So it dealt 10 damage, it has 5 HP left, but when I go ahead and unlock all of the supply, now our damage output should be at 30. Ignore that. I'm gonna have to change that message. Go ahead and cast on this. It went ahead and killed it in one shot. Now let me go ahead and I'm gonna go and fight the dragon over here. Kind of show you it better in action. So here's the dragon. If I hover over him, Lesser Arc Coil has 30 health exactly, so I can go ahead and cast. So previously it would take 3 hits in order to kill this lesser Archwell, and now with this, you just kill him in 1 hit. So the reason why I'm going to be changing just the damage output and not the health is pretty much as mentioned a little bit ago. I don't think it's too necessary in order to improve the health of a single unit, since you're basically all just running as a pack anyway. The mana might become a bit more of an issue, but that's when the difficulties start to kind of get in place. So the RTS mode is technically the ideal way to play it, but not the easiest way, especially for the newer players and players that have no idea how the game is played. But as being a newer player, if you're having problems or you're struggling around taking too much damage, you can always switch over to the disciple mode for the games, the easy difficulty, and then basically play the game normally from there, and I think you should have a good time. Albeit going forward, if you're brand new to the game, the recommended difficulty would be picking Apprentice difficulty and then picking Simplified mode. So you get this core experience of running around with a single unit, but the Simplified experience where you don't have to control multiple units and are basically playing the game the way that I'll be balancing it going forward from here. So there's quite a bit of adjustments that need to be done in order to make the Simplified game mode work. And of course I'll be adding it as a settings option in here, so you can just toggle it off freely. So let me go ahead and jump into that after all of that exhausting dialogue of so let's go see what I can code up. Well, the first major adjustment to be made is actually in the settings menu. So as you can see here, I added the gameplay scheme and the difficulty options in here. Just to kind of set them up. So as you can see, we've got simplistic and we got RTS mode. Set it to simplistic, and then of course you can set it to whatever you like. This of course works with save and load, so I'll need to actually work in the actual back-end code to make these function, but you can pick them, you can set them, and this applies to your save file as well, so that's good. So I'll be able to kind of start coding off of that, but I'll of course need to make the logic so that you can only change this in the home base or based on, you know, normal stuff like saving and loading the game, that kind of thing. So without further ado, now I can kind of start to jump in and start to tackle both of these individually. Alright, so I got the basis of camera rotation in there, so it looks pretty cool when it does it too. So if you go ahead and pan your mouse to either side of the screen, it's going to go ahead and rotate around your main unit. So after this, I definitely need to work on making it so that as the character moves, you of course rotate around them, but that'll be on next. Of course, you can also use the arrow keys, so left and right arrow keys are also going to rotate around the unit. Just so all the standard controls of how you can rotate are still there, plus, of course, panning your mouse to the sides, which I think is pretty cool. Then, of course, if you switch on over to RTS mode, the standard controls go back in, so you can go ahead and pan around and rotate around and all that good stuff. Alright, so I got the new camera controls in, so as you can see, when I go ahead and click and move, camera goes ahead and follows, and of course, if we go ahead and pan to the sides, and get some nice rotation going on. You can of course rotate while moving, and then of course zooming in and out works. You can do whatever you want. You can zoom in, zoom out, etc, etc, and you can of course switch back to the other game mode, so RTS mode on, and it works just like how it did previously. Nothing too crazy there. There is a minor bug where I gotta fix it here. When you switch back, there's a bit of a offset, as you can see here, that's incorrect, but I'll work on that a little bit later. But that's the camera controls in, and because why not, I should probably show my code off for it. I didn't find anything about doing this kind of camera style online. Otherwise you'd probably be using like Cinemachine or something like that. So I figured I might as well just show off the code a little bit. So let's go ahead and go into the first part of the code. So you can see everything's running this late update. You can go ahead and let's go into the focus on lead unit code. As you can see, a bunch of junk I gotta get rid of, but for the time being, just very simple. Grab our unit. Our desired position is wherever that unit's position is, plus our camera offset. So this camera offset is a very important variable where we just basically set it to wherever we want our camera to be in terms of XYZ positioning. This is not taking into account rotation in any way. That's being basically, rotation is basically being done separately from this. But for positioning, the most important part, this is all handled through here. So this camera offset is actually be a very important variable. And then we just set it. I found out that if you try to do any kind of smoothing, it starts to mess up the positioning. So I just neglected any of that because it doesn't really seem like I need it. The units move pretty smoothly as it is, so the camera is not getting any sort of weird jittering action. So let's go ahead and go back up to the top. So as you can see, immediately following that is the rotate camera. So let's hop in here. So I have just a little separate checker right here. This is just checking to make sure it's in simplistic mode. And as you can see here, if you're pressing any of the right buttons, we go ahead and do a transform rotate around our unit, and whichever direction we need it to be, so either right or to the left. From there, very important, is the camera offset going to be taken into account. So the camera offset is being dynamically changed at runtime based on your settings as you go ahead and rotate and zoom and all that kind of stuff. So as you can see here, we store the variable right here, this previous frame position. This previous frame position is of course taken from here. So right before we run our rotate around logic, we go ahead and store the unit's position, and as you can see here, we go ahead and set the previous frame position to the unit's original positioning. So ignore this part right here, I'll get to that in a second. So let's go back up to the top. So as you can see here on the next following frame, and this code could actually probably be cleaned up and be more in line. This is just the base layer of code, just to kind of give you a rundown of it. So as you can see here, running up to the top on the next frame, if our previous frame position is not 0, we go ahead and take our current frame position and subtract it from the previous one, and then update our camera offset accordingly. So this will give us our rotation, this will give us our zooming. Speaking of, we'll go ahead and head into the zooming functionality. So this is actually still using this is the only code that didn't need to be changed essentially from the original zooming in and out logic. So as you can see here, get our either zoom out or zoom in logic, and then come in here and just do a simple transform translate. That gives us our new positioning, and with that new position we do the exact same thing. We set our previous frame position to the original position. And that basically just runs exactly how it was just a few seconds ago when I was talking about rotation. So now about this little top part. So this top part's pretty important in terms of making it so that you can both rotate and zoom at the same time. Without this little bit of code here, it basically just everything just messes up. So as you can see here, if our previous frame position is not currently 0, we now need to do the logic inline. As you can see here, we take our current position, so our position has already been updated, or at least I believe it should have been already updated by this transform translate. So this has been updated. Our original position is of course that temp previous position, so this is just the position right before doing the translate. And then coming back down here, we just go ahead and immediately update the camera offset with this difference. And that allows it to be rotatable and zooming at the same time. So very simple code, but a little bit complicated. Took a little bit to kind of really work through this previous frame position stuff, where it's just kind of getting the difference of the offset of what's changed in the camera position as you rotate and zoom. It took a little bit of thinking, but now with this here, you should be able to kind of code up your own if you're interested in a similar style. So I went ahead and worked in all of the difficulty adjustments, so that is going to include adjusting the enemy's damage, and then of course adjusting the enemy's health. So as you can see here, let's go ahead and walk on over here. And our coil's about right here. And you can see it's at 30 HP. So if I go ahead and adjust the settings, I'll adjust it down to easy mode. So this is going to have half the normal HP and deal half the regular damage. If I go ahead and come on over here, as you can see, let's get hit first. But as you can see, if I hover over the R coil, it now has 15 HP. And of course, what you just saw a second ago, I got hit for 10 damage. The fireball normally deals 20 damage. We can get hit again. So we're at 200 HP, get hit once, and down to 190. Of course, the Disciple has some HP regeneration, so it's not perfect for right now. And then, of course, I went ahead and adjusted all of the other ones. So in follower mode, the enemies are going to have double their normal HP and deal double their regular damage. So we go back on over here. Here's the R coil again, and it's now at 60 health. And the last difficulty setting is, of course, the master difficulty setting. So setting this to this is going to perform the exact same thing. So enemies now are going to have double HP and deal double damage, but if the player is ever damaged by an enemy spell, it will instantly kill that player unit. So this is important for, say, friendly fire. Enemies aren't going to friendly fire and one-shot each other, because that would be kind of silly. On top of that, enemies aren't going to have any additional adjustments to their healing damage, so with healing effects, like if there's a spell that deals negative 20 damage, that's not going to just full heal the other enemy unit. It's going to instead deal the regular doubled healing percentage. And we can show that off pretty easily by just walking over here and getting hit, and we're instantly dead. Pretty cool. And then of course the last one is going to be the Grandmaster difficulty. So this one, to start off with, I've just set up some health and damage adjustments, and I'll go ahead and work these in. Eventually there's going to be way more settings, like a randomizer, etc., etc. And then of course in current Grandmaster difficulty mode, the enemies are basically just set back to their normal defaults by default. So if I hover over the arc coil again, as you can see, it's back to 30 HP. So that should complete the damage adjustments. I can go ahead and work all this into the main menu, so that you'll be able to access it from the new game screen. Alright, so here we are. So I added all the settings to the main menu. Let's go ahead and check them out. I actually need to discuss something a little bit later, but let's go ahead and just look at all the settings first. So when you go ahead and enter into the game, you can click New Game, and we get a cool little fade in. We get this choice between the simplistic version or the RTS mode version. You can select whichever one you want. And then of course the little note here that you can switch gameplay schemes at any time, so we'll just click simplistic. Doesn't really matter which we click. And then of course we get all of our difficulties, so what I was talking about before: Disciple, Apprentice, Follower, Master, a short description of them, so easy, standard, hard, hardest, etc., and then what's actually entailed in each of them. And of course the note here that we can switch difficulties at any time, excluding Grandmaster difficulty of course. So there's some slightly unique stuff going on with Grandmaster that we'll look into in a second. But first, let's just look at the settings for it. So as soon as you click Grandmaster, it goes ahead and brings up the settings, so you can go ahead and adjust the enemy health modifier to whatever you want, their damage modifier as well. And then of course scrolling down to the bottom, you're going to have at the very bottom of the settings list is going to be the Enter Game button. So you go ahead and click this, and it'll enter into Grandmaster difficulty. Now since we're already here, we might as well just enter into it. I'll kind of show what's going on with Grandmaster difficulty. So here we are in game, and of course when I go ahead and bring up the settings menu and press settings again, now we have this difficulty set to Grandmaster. So when I go ahead and click it, instead of getting a drop down, we're actually going to get our modifiers listed out here, so you can see exactly what's going on. So this is actually changed from probably the previous clip. I was going to try and get it so that the modifiers are adjustable in-game. I found that probably would be kind of a bad idea going forward. Theoretically, it's possible. I mean, right now it's just enemy health and damage modifier, but going forward, especially when I have much more custom settings, I don't think it's going to be possible. I think just creating a new game and then setting your modifiers at the beginning of the new game is sufficient enough. But maybe in the future I'll want to adjust it so it's adjustable in-game, but not right now. One of the things you should probably just notice is the fact that when you click this, it's a button on Grandmaster difficulty. So Grandmaster difficulty from the drop-down is no longer going to be selectable, or actually already adjusted it, so you can only adjust through easy to hardest difficulties and not be able to switch into Grandmaster just because we can't modify Grandmaster at all once we're in it. So you either, at the very beginning of the game, select Grandmaster, or you select one of the other difficulties. So what I was talking about previously, I wanted to kind of make mention of the fact that when you press new game here, in my opinion, and it's just kind of like my idea, I'm kind of floating around with, and trying to see if I want to do a physical change or not, but I don't like the fact that you're greeted with this screen. So you go ahead and click new game, and then it's the first thing you do. Instead of being dropped into the game, you're basically choosing between, do you want to play RTS mode or not? A player may or may not know that, so you go ahead and click whichever one you want, and then after that you immediately choose a difficulty. I feel like these options are kind of like too in your face. It's not simplistic enough for my preferences, essentially. So I've been kind of thinking of an idea, and I might try and work into it a little bit more next time I'm going around. But I might try and make it so that instead of having it done through the new game screen, As soon as you click New Game, it just drops you right into the game. And as you're playing around the game, once you meet special criteria, you're going to go ahead and get essentially recommended for different stuff. So this is going to mean for brand new players, the brand new player is going to start off in simplistic mode, and as soon as they get their first bit of supply, it's going to then prompt them, do they want to play in RTS mode, or do they want to play or keep playing in simplistic mode? So it's totally up to the player at that point in time. So I think that's a fairly decent idea. And then of course, when you go ahead and are playing through the game, and maybe you die like say 5 to 10 times, the game prompts you, do you want to switch from Apprentice difficulty into Disciple, the easy difficulty? Just so that it's just like, if the player is unaware that they can switch difficulties, they can do so. And then of course, all the way back to the beginning, let me jump back to the bit. So when you go ahead and click New Game here, instead of being prompted with this simplistic and RTS mode screen, you're going to be prompted with a big button that says Enter Game, or a little button down here that says Custom Advanced Settings. When you press Custom Advanced Settings, it'll bring you to the simplistic RTS mode, then of course the difficulties, and of course you can pick Grandmaster, you get to adjust all of these difficulties. I think that might be a little bit more simplistic and more direct for new players, just to kind of lead them down a specific path rather than basically just give them all these options. These options are great for returning players, but I feel as though they could get a little bit intrusive, but I'll think about that for next time. So this should be the end of part 1 of this blog. So this blog is going to entail essentially all of the storyline overhauls and save game overhauls, and I may hopefully be able to get to the new random maps, but that'll come much later. So in part 2, I'm definitely going to be working on the storyline more. And then of course, in part 2, I should be having more of a concrete decision on what I want to do with this new game button. I want to simplify more, or if this is just like good enough, which this might just be okay. I think a lot of players and a lot of gamers in general are kind of used to a few screens once they press New Game to kind of customize and pick some stuff. So, especially in the RPG realm, where you're basically just selecting tons of your initial stats and whatnot. But I'll think about it some more, and until next time, you guys take care.